No one touches my daughter when I am not here. Layla Hassan froze mid-breath, kneeling beside the shallow marble pool at the heart of the private hammam. Steam drifted in pale ribbons, caught by the lattice of a carved dome above, where sunlight spilled in broken geometries across blue and gold tesserae. The air was thick with rosewater and a faint thread of oud, the scent curling around the bronze lanterns that trembled ever so slightly with the heat. She had just poured a final copper ladle over Princess Nur's tiny head. The 2-year-old giggled, tapping the surface with her palms so that a ring of bright drops kissed Layla's cheek and the mosaic floor. Layla smiled soft, reflexive until the voice came like a blade through silk. The deep, sharp baritone of Sheikh Zayed Al Maktoum slammed into her chest. Layla's hand hovered in the air, fingers splayed, skin slick with warmth. Her heart struck the inside of her ribs. For a moment the world narrowed to the hiss of water and the echo of his words. He was home. He was not supposed to be home. Noor had run hot all afternoon, cheeks flushed, breath shallow between drowsy whimpers, the kind of heat that made a child heavy in the arms. The royal governess had been called away to the women's majlis and an urgent errand, whispered apologies. The attendants were buried under preparations for the Sheikh's anticipated return tomorrow. Fresh date trays, carpets shaken in the courtyards, glass polished until it looked like water. Layla could not bear the child's discomfort. She had prepared the bath like a prayer. Water just warm, petals drifting in constellation patterns, a lullaby stitched from memory and longing. The rhythm of leather sandals on marble announced him before his shadow cut across the doorway. Layla rose, fluid on bare feet, gathered Noor into a towel embroidered with the crest of the House of Al Maktoum, and held her close, the little body damp and warm against Layla's forearms. "My lord," she began, but he had already stepped beneath the gilded arch. Light from the corridor sheen over a black bisht lined in gold, over a white thobe that made his height more austere. His jaw was stone, his eyes burned. The air in the hammam, already heavy with steam, seemed to thicken into something that resisted breath. Noor startled in Layla's grip, a small cry crumpling her mouth. The towel slipped an inch. Layla tightened her hold, instinct taking the reins from fear. She felt warm. "Your Highness," Layla said, voice careful as a hand around flame. He crossed the mosaic like a storm rolling over desert flats, pulled the child from Layla's arms in one jolt that turned Noor's confusion to panic. The girl's fingers clutched a fist of his bisht. The word came on a sob, "Baba," and then another sob, and then the trembling that rattled through her little shoulders. He cradled her against his chest, the hard line of his anger aimed squarely at Layla. "You were bathing her. In my absence, she was overheated," Layla answered, trembling but anchored. "I feared she would faint. The governess was absent." "You are not her mother," he said. "You are a servant, you tend to rooms." "I did not mean to overstep," Layla said softly. She needed to be eased. His jaw flexed. The tendons in his hands stood out like cords as he gripped the towel around Noor. Power gathered around him the way heat gathers at the lip of noon. "Collect your things," he said. Layla looked at Noor, at the small face crushed into the curve of her father's neck, at the tears slicking her lashes. She lowered her gaze, bowed with the economy of someone who knew when silence was the safest path, and left the hammam without the sound of argument. Only the drip of water offered witness. The servants' corridor smelled of lemon soap and old stone. Layla walked it slowly, each step measuring the shape of a future that had shrunk to a canvas back and a handful of coins. In her little room off the inner courtyard, she folded her blue cotton dress, the one Noor had soaked with sleepy sweat, laid her hair scarf on top, wrapped a needle kit and a jar of balm her mother had taught her to make. Through the open mashrabia, she could hear a fountain's thread of music and the distant birds that nested in the palms. Harun found her there, the palace's old major domo, bone tall and sandwiced, with a kind of presence that made the unspoken feel heard. His beard was white to the line of his mouth, his eyes unfailingly gentle. He asked, using the tenderness elders keep for those they choose as their own. "I only wanted her to feel better," Layla said, and the words trembled as if she had lifted something heavy and set it down at last. "That is why he is angry," Harun replied, after a small pause. He studied her. Layla's mouth curved in a thin smile that was more ache than joke. "It was only water." He gestured toward the gate. "Go. The night will be kind." Layla passed beneath the arch into light. Behind her, the courtyard glowed the color of warm honey. Above, the dome cut the sky into petals. She did not look back. She carried the scent of rose and the echo of a child's cry as if they were two sides of the same coin. In his private majlis, Zayd sat rigid upon a low velvet cushion, the kind embroidered with thread that caught the light like dew. Noor slept against him, spent from grief, a fine blanket of white cotton shielding her from the room's chill. Outside the lattice, the late sun dulled toward copper. Inside, everything seemed arranged for calm: the brass coffee dalla on a tray of dates, the books in their niches, the soft rug underfoot, and yet calm refused him. He had returned early from council sessions in Abu Dhabi, the weight of decisions still riding his shoulders, expecting impeccable order within his walls. Instead, he had stepped into the most intimate of scenes, an image so tender it set off a flare of panic in a corner of him that had never learned gentleness. Layla, quiet-eyed, kneeling in steam, hands sure upon his child, his mind had leapt to trespass, to impropriety, to every word a man reaches for when he is afraid of what he cannot control. Now, with Noor's breath dampening his throat, the scene replayed not as offense but as indictment. His daughter had not clung to him as she used to. Her fingers had not knotted in his collar the way they did in the first months after Aliya's passing. She had sobbed for Layla, reaching toward the door even as he pulled her away. It was a sound he knew from grief's first winter, the sound that opens from the belly, from a wound that never quite closes. A soft knock braided itself into the room's hush. "My lord," Harun's voice came, shaped by cedar and years. "Enter," Zayd said. Harun stepped in, bowed. Zayd's brow tightened. "She touched the princess without leave." "It may be so," Harun said, "but sometimes the line is only a shadow cast by pride." The child was hot. The governess was gone. "This is not a debate about intention," Zayd replied, the old heat trying for his voice. "It is about boundaries." Zayd looked up sharply. "You did not hear it because your anger was the loudest thing in the room. But I heard it, and Layla did not teach her." Zayd's gaze dropped to the small crescent of Noor's ear, to the damp curls pasted there, to the tiny pulse he could feel against his forearm. The child's mouth moved, dream, murmur, fragment of word. "She is only 2, he said, but the words felt like an argument with the sea. "Perhaps," Harun allowed, "or perhaps she knows precisely what refuge feels like." Silence expanded, then settled in the joints of the room. Zayd asked, voice lower, "Called to the women's majlis to attend an ailing aunt." Layla offered herself before anyone could ask. No one paid her for tenderness. "I hired her to tend rooms," Zayd said. Harun's tone gathered a quiet spine. "With respect, my lord, a polished floor does not lower a fever. Fresh linens do not sing a child to calm." Guilt moved through Zayd like a slow tide returning to a parched shoreline. The memory of Aliya's voice, the way she could turn a corridor into a lullaby, rose and broke and rose again. He had walled that part of the palace, he had walled that part of himself. And somehow, without his permission, Layla had opened a door, not to replace what had been lost, but to let breath move in a room that had been shut for too long. He fought the instinct to defend what was left of his certainty. A ruler commands, a father protects. Yet he had mistaken shouting for protection, distance for control. He asked at last, the question barbed. He bowed again, not in victory but in care, and withdrew. Noor's hand twitched against Zayd's wrist. Her lips parted. The smallest sound slid out like a thread of silk. He stilled. It could have meant Aliya. It could have meant Layla. Perhaps in some way that did not fit words it meant both, the past and the present braided into one sound. From beyond the palace walls, the evening ant trembled over the city, a call that turned roofs to listening. In the returning quiet, Zayd understood something that ended him more than anger ever could. He did not know how to raise his daughter alone. Not fully, not well, not in the way she deserved. He bent and pressed his lips to Noor's hair, tasting salt and rosewater. And for the first time since grief had made a fortress of him, Sheikh Zayd Al Maktoum let the thought stand without chasing it away. Perhaps he needed help. Not from nobles or decrees, from a woman who had wrapped his child in warmth and steadied her with a song. The palace awoke differently the morning after Layla's dismissal. No bright chorus of swift footsteps, no effortless choreography of trays and linens and silver clinking faintly like rain. Instead, sound traveled strangely, as if the corridors were listening. Palms along the inner courtyards threw lacy shadows over the marble. Mashrabia's screen sifted sun into honeycombed light. But beneath all that beauty, there was the hush that follows a slammed door. The kitchen's brewed coffee darker, thicker, cardamom folded into heat. The head housekeeper counted dates twice for the morning trays and still miscounted. Whispers gathered in the cool places, by the inner fountain, beneath the arch to the hammam, at the threshold of the royal nursery. In that nursery, a room painted the blue of an evening sea, Princess Noor sat cross-legged on an emerald cushion. A brass birdcage hung by the window, empty except for a sprig of jasmine someone had tucked there weeks ago. The governess, back from the women's majlis, set out carved camels and a little palm made of olive wood, inviting Noor into a journey across the carpet's deserts. Noor reached with small hands, then drew them back. The door creaked, she turned, hope leaping in, then her eyes dimmed again when it was only a maid with fresh water. Later, the governess murmured, but Noor's gaze had already moved inward to the place where absence hums. From the adjoining chamber, Zayd watched a while through the narrow arch. He had learned to read the language of his daughter's silence, the way her toe tapped inside a tiny sandal, the way her lashes held, then flutter. This was not the sulk of a moment. It was the patient ache of a child who waits for a specific voice. He entered, and for one heartbeat Noor's face lit like a lantern. Then it dimmed. She tucked her chin and traced the wooden camel's flank with one finger. He asked. Softer than he meant, the governess rose with a bow and left them, her amber bracelets whispering. Noor did not look up. The words were gentle, almost practical, and they lodged in him like a barb. She is gone, he said. And even as he spoke he felt the word's wrongness. Noor nodded once, adult solemnity on a child's face, and turned the camel so it faced the door. Late afternoon carried Sheikh Maryam into the palace like a verdict wrapped in silk. She came in ivory, the hem of her abaya kissing the floor, a fine bish draped from one shoulder the way queens were history. Emeralds glinted at her throat, her prayer beads clicked once, twice, as she paused under the arch and took possession of the majlis with a glance. Incense curled from a burner, but stroked with frankincense, the scent of old courts and older rules. Zayd kissed her hand and waited, as he had as a boy when she visited with dates and lessons he didn't know were lessons. People talk, he answered, schooling his face. They say you dismissed a servant in the night. Maryam let the coffee settle. Or she stepped into an absence you allowed to widen. She sipped and then set the cup down. Precise. Quiet. Stability is not a rumor one declares, it is a habit one keeps. She rose in a susurrus of silk and left him with the click of beads fading like a judgment that would wait as long as it took. Night folded itself over the palace with a pale moon and a cooling wind. Zayd walked, the courtyards made their soft water sounds. The lantern glass, colored like pomegranate and sea, through shifting mosaics over stone. He expected anger to carry him, but it was memory that did. Ali's laugh falling down the stairwell like bells. The night Noor was born and he had held a bundle of breath and astonishment. The first morning, after grief, when he could not bring himself to open a door for fear of what air would smell like without her. And then yesterday's steam, and rosewater, and Layla's careful hands, how quickly fear had set fire to everything tender. He paused by the hammam, laid his palm to the cool jam. The scent of it clung faintly to the stone. If he closed his eyes he could almost hear Layla humming that small, round song that seemed to fit exactly into Noor's breathing. A decision formed in him like a crescent moon, thin, unfinished, but impossible to ignore. In the old district, Layla woke before dawn to the muezzin's call, the voice unrolling across rooftops like silk in a breeze. Her room was a whitewashed square with a window cut to the street. The bread oven below breathed out warmth fanned yeast. Someone shouted prices for dates. Someone laughed. A cartwheel stuttered over a stone and carried on. Layla washed at a chip basin, water from a brass jug turning her hands cold. She dressed in a plain abaya and tied her headscarf with the quick hands of someone who had worn many uniforms. She told herself the palace had been only a job. She told herself the ache beneath her ribs was fatigue. She told herself many gentle lies and believed none of them. Once, briefly, she had imagined she might be the sort of woman who lives in one place all her life, loved by neighbors, remembered by a grocer who knows which fig she prefers. Instead, her life had been a map of careful exits. Noor had not been a detour, she had been a harbor. Layla's throat tightened. She pressed her palm flat to the windowsill until the feeling passed. By mid-morning, the palace rhythms had resumed their choreography, but missteps betrayed the day. The gardener pruned too much off a lemon tree. A scullion spilled milk and wept as if she had dropped a crown. Zayd returned to accounts and petitions, and a list of names had mattered less than the one that be underneath all of it. In the afternoon he stood in the nursery doorway and watched Noor sleep, a damp curl corkscrewed to her cheek, the toe falcon cloth stuffed with cotton and stitched in gold thread pinched under her arm. He whispered a prayer without realizing it, a small one, the kind a man says when he cannot think what else to do. To dawn after Layla's return to the palace came not with a single burst of light, but with a slow unfurling, as if the day itself were reluctant to disturb the fragile balance restored in the night. Above Abu Dhabi, the horizon bloomed in layers of gold, rose, and pale blue, each shade melting into the next like ink in water. The domes of the palace caught the first rays and glowed faintly, their carved crescents glinting like watchful eyes. Inside the palace walls, the air held that rarest of qualities, a quiet anticipation, heavy yet hopeful. The scent of night jasmine lingered from the gardens, twining with the sharper aroma of mint tea steeping in the kitchens. In the inner courtyard, the fountains whispered their silver language into pools that mirrored the softening sky, their ripples distorting the reflection of day palms swaying gently in the Gulf breeze. The kitchens were already alive. Copper pots rang with soft percussion, ladles stirred slow rivers of saffron and lamb broth, and the rhythmic slap of dough against wooden boards kept time with murmured conversations. Yet, despite the industry, there was a subtle restraint in the air, as if even the servants' hands moved with the knowledge that something or someone had returned who could alter the day's course. Up in the nursery, Princess Noor slept past her usual hour, her small frame curled into the embroidered blanket as if reluctant to part from the warmth. The fever that had marked her cheeks the day before had receded, leaving only a faint flush of health. Beside her, Layla sat on the low window bench, the intricate lattice casting shifting patterns over her abaya. She hummed an old song from her childhood, no lyrics, only the slow rise and fall of melody that had soothed generations before her. In her dream, Noor still felt the cool press of Layla's palm against her forehead, heard the rustle of fabric as the woman shifted in the night, never leaving her side. Even asleep, the girl's fingers curled around a fold of Layla's garment, holding on as if it were the tether between her and some vast, empty sky. When Layla rose to pour fresh water from the silver ewer into a small basin, the guards outside the nursery door straightened slightly. They did not speak, they never did, but exchanged a glance that said they had seen the change. The child's rest was deeper, her breathing steadier, her room warmer for reasons beyond the blankets. By mid-morning, the whispers had already spread. In the laundry courtyard, maids hanging linens under the sun speculated in hushed tones. In the kitchens, Layla's name passed between the steam of boiling lentils and the sweet scent of dates stuffed with almonds. The Sheikh himself went to the old district to bring her back, insisted one cook. Zayd heard fragments of such talk in the corridors, but ignored them. His day was already layered with demands, land disputes between coastal clans, negotiations over trade with a merchant family in Doha, preparations for the Majlis in 3 nights' time, a gathering where alliances were renewed or fractured over the smallest misstep. Yet, no matter the matter at hand, his thoughts wandered back to the nursery, to the sound of Layla's voice filling the room with something warmer than air. After due prayer, his steps led him there without conscious choice. He paused at the threshold. Layla sat on a thick emerald cushion, her legs tucked beneath her, a large illustrated book opened before her and Noor. Some light spilled through the mashrabia, painting their faces in a delicate dance of shadow and light. Noor's small hand traced the image of a falcon mid-flight, its wings spread in fierce grace. "A falcon is more than a bird, Habibti," Layla said softly, her voice carrying the cadence of old truths. Noor tilted her head, absorbing the words, her gaze fixed on the image. Zayd, standing silent, felt them land somewhere within him as well. That evening, the palace began its transformation for the private dinner in honor of a visiting dignitary from Muscat. The dining hall became a gallery of color and light, deep crimson silk runners trimmed in gold, lanterns of stained glass casting jeweled glows across polished marble, silver platters awaiting the feast. The air grew heavy with the perfume of roasted lamb, saffron, and sweet apricots. A smoke curled lazily from ornate burners, threading through the air like a slow dance. While overseeing final touches, Zayd caught sight of Layla in a side corridor, speaking to a young kitchen attendant. She handed him a covered dish, her tone firm yet kind. When their eyes met, she dipped her head in respectful acknowledgement before stepping away into the quiet. The dinner unfolded with the practiced elegance of courtly diplomacy. Toasts were raised over kawa poured from brass dalies. Polite laughter covered subtle negotiations, and beneath the smooth exchanges lay the constant calculation of power. Yet Zayd's mind drifted to the quiet authority in the way Layla moved through the palace, as though she knew exactly which currents to disturb and which to leave untouched. When the final guest departed, he found himself drawn back to the nursery. Noor slept, her hand curled around a small carved falcon. Layla sat reading by an oil lamp, her features softened by its warm glow. "She ate well tonight," Layla said without looking up. Orrery settled over him. "I told her the pearl story again," she added. "She always loved that one," he said. The fountain's murmur filled the pause between them, until he spoke again. "In 3 nights, there will be a majlis. Sheikh Maryam will attend. Many others too." "There always are," she replied. In the days before the majlis, the palace became a place of ordered frenzy. Courtyards were swept until the marble gleamed, carpets beaten until their colors deepened, brass lanterns polished until they shone like captured suns. Trays of dates, figs, and sugared almonds were prepared, each arranged with the precision of art. Even the air seemed to tighten, waiting for the night to come. When it did, the gates opened to a stream of guests whose garments caught the light like the shifting surface of the sea. The scent of wood mingled with the salt air as the heat of the day gave way to a gentler night. Inside, the majlis pulsed with quiet power. Men in dishdashes moving like white sails across the rich carpets, women in jeweled abayas gliding past in murmured conversation, gold and emerald glinting in the lamplight. From the upper gallery, Layla watched unseen. Noor sat at Sheikh Maryam's side, her small emerald kaftan gleaming, her braids bound with gold. Pride and something unnamed cold in Layla's chest at the sight. When Zayd entered, the atmosphere shifted subtly, but undeniably. Conversation stilled for a heartbeat before resuming, voices pitched just lower. His eyes found hers across the space, and for that brief instant, it felt as though the gallery was the only bridge between them. The majlis moved through its motions, greetings, speeches, the exchange of gifts, each gesture layered with unspoken meaning. But in the spaces between the words, between the glances, another conversation flowed, silent and unseen, yet no less binding. When the night ended and the last lanterns dimmed, Zayd knew the story of the falcon had only begun. And some part of him, a part he could not yet name, hoped it would never find its end. The morning after the majlis did not so much arrive as unfold petal by patient petal until light lay over Abu Dhabi like a silk shawl. The palace held that liminal hush that follows nights of ceremony, as if the walls themselves were tasting the residue of incense and promises. Minarets on the far horizon lifted crescents to the sun. The desert beyond the city exhaled heat it had hoarded all night. Inside the courtyards, water kept its silver counsel, servants moved in small constellations. Silk runners were rolled around lacquered poles. Lanterns with stained glass panes were unhooked and nested in straw like sleeping birds. Cushions were shaken, their gold threads winking in brief sparks. The air carried cardamom and something more elusive, the faint, almost floral sweetness that it leaves in the seams of a room. In the nursery, morning came as ritual. Noor sat on a low divan while Layla divided her hair with the tooth-smooth spine of an old cedar comb. Long strokes, unhurried. The child leaned back with each pass until her small shoulder rested against Layla's knee, trusting the hand she could not see. Layla kissed the crown of her head, to try always to sit like a listener first. From the corridor, Zayd's shadow crossed the doorway and stilled. He knew the palace by the rhythm of its sounds metal on marble, the distant clatter of trays from the kitchen, the cadence of footfalls that told him mood as much as movement, but this soundless intimacy could unmake him. The way Noor's breathing matched the coom's unhurried travel. The way Layla's gaze softened when it fell on the child and sharpened the moment it lifted to the window, reading weather, reading day. By mid-morning, messages began their quiet journeys. A hawk-faced courier with a leather satchel slipped through the back gate toward the old city. The chief scribe sent 3 letters, different writers, to the same man, belt and suspenders, as Maryam liked to say with a smile that never reached her eyes. The palace had learned long ago that words travel like water. They will arrive. The question is only where and in what shape. When the summons came, it carried the cool of shade with it. Sheikh Maryam requested her nephew in the private garden. He found her beneath a trellis sagging with bougainvillea, magenta blooms falling in slow motion whenever the fountain's breeze found them. Orange blossoms clung to the air. A carved lion's mouth poured a thin stream into a tiled basin pattern in peacock blues. Maryam's abaya was the color of crushed pearls. Her prayer beads clicked once, the sound of a decision about to be spoken. "You were unassailable last night," she said, pouring kawa with the accuracy of a jeweler. he asked, taking the thimble cup, the bitter scent like a door he had walked through all his life. Your attention is a banner, she said. It will either shelter or draw arrows. He watched a bougainvillea petal lose its grip and fall into the water, spin, find an eddy. Spectacle is what happens when intention sleeps, she replied. People saw you look up, they did not see to whom. They will write the rest. Perception is a weather I cannot command, he said. You can build walls with few windows, she said, or you can plant a garden and learn wind. Both are labor. He was quiet for a long time. When he rose to go, Maryam reached out and caught his wrist with a hand light as lace. Say it. Elsewhere, Layla walked the eastern arcade, the one that caught morning light and traded it for shade in a game that lasted all day. Gardeners were cutting roses back to force the next riot of red. Petals fell to the earth like tiny flags of surrender. The smell was heady, sweet with a knife in it. Through the carved screen, she saw the youngest gardener, a beau with sunburned ears, pick up a perfect rose head and tuck it behind his ear. He noticed her watching and, grinning, moved it to his heart. She laughed softly, the small sound surprising even to herself. A wind rose afternoon, first as rumor in the palms, then as a low animal sound coming from the desert's throat. The sky thickened to a coin's dull metal. Shut, called the steward, and shutters closed like blinking eyes. The sandstorm arrived as a wall, a moving mountain the color of old dates. It swallowed distances, it erased edges. The palace sealed itself, drew curtains, weighted doors, dust hissed in the seams of the world. In the nursery, Noor stood beside Layla at the window and pressed her palm to the glass, as if she could feel how the desert spoke. It's like the earth is walking, she said. Or like it remembers. We are only borrowing these walls, Layla answered. The storm found her into places at once, here, with this child, and far away, in a courtyard of her girlhood, where her father told her how sand could bury a path and also make one, if you learned its language. The power flickered once, a quick bow, then steadied. In the dimness, the fountain was a voice of refusal. Water, water, water. Layla held the child until Noor's curiosity drooped into sleep, then sat by the bed and unspooled a memory, a pearl found in a market and how its light was only borrowed moon. By evening, the storm moved like a caravan past the city, leaving the sky a bruised amber. Dust lacquered every surface. A strange tenderness came with the quiet, like the pause after confession. They opened the shutters, air edging with a taste of metal and rain not yet granted. Zayd came to the nursery. Noor slept with her fist around the carved falcon's wing as if she were keeping it from leaving. Layla sat mending a tiny dress, camel-colored linen with an embroidered hem of crescents and stars. The needle flashed, the thread tugged, the tear closed. She is stronger now, Layla said, eyes on her work. She is, he agreed. Layla did not look up. Strength is a shape that changes, she said. Sometimes it is standing. They met eyes then, and in the soft lamp glow, the distance between a ruler and a servant thinned into something made of breath and heat and rest. She looked away first. The sound of the fountain marked time again. In the days that followed, the palace turned toward a new act, a charity banquet for the restoration of a mosque in the old city. Unlike the Majlis, which measured power among equals, this gathering braided straight nobility, scholars, merchants, artists, each with its own vocabulary of dignity. Sheikh Maryam curated the list like a garden, certain seeds together for color, others separated for survival. Layla's world expanded to include rooms she had not lingered in before, the textile chamber, where silk from Damascus slept under muslin until woken, the silver room where trays shone like small moons, the florist's alcove where orange blossom and jasmine negotiated peace. She moved through them with an authority that surprised junior staff into obedience. She did not raise her voice. She placed 2 fingers on the crooked lantern and it straightened. She shifted a bowl of figs a single hand's width and a table learned balance. One afternoon, in the cool of the ceramics core, she found an old craftsman hunched over a tray of turquoise tiles, his hands cracked, nails dark with clay. The palace had commissioned boarders to frame calligraphy panels for the banquet, Layla asked, crouching to his level. He glanced up through lashes white with dust. It is only Ferris now, he said. She smiled. Then I need only Ferris. The calligraphy panels arrive in an hour. He snorted, which in certain men is a form of respect. Someone who heard them the last time they sang, she answered, thinking of a shrine where blue met white and lifted prayer like a cup. That last line changed the air. Ferris nodded. Bring me the panels, and they arrive. The night of the banquet smelled like jasmine and warm sugar. A connon stitched its silver thread through the hall. Candles floated in shallow bowls along the floor, multiplying their light in the polished marble until it seemed like stars had fallen and found a calm sea. The arches wore their filigree like old gold. The charity box, a carved cedar chest with a brass lock, sat on a low table before the dais, neither humble nor proud, simply ready. Guests arrived in waves, a scholar whose beard had turned the color of smoke, a merchant couple, hands inked with henna vines that told their own story, a poet with a silver tongue and scuffed sandals, an architect whose palms knew the weight of stone, a prince from Muscat with courtesy smooth as silk and eyes that counted. From her place near the logistics door, Layla watched Zayd greet them. His bisht fell from his shoulders the way a falcon's shadow falls over dune, soft until you look up and understand the power behind it. He was gracious without waste. He placed his attention like a coin with the exact weight required. Sheikh Maryam stood beside him, every inch the arbiter of harmony. When she raised one finger, a steward appeared. When she smiled, a room remembered its best manners. Layla moved only when needed. A lantern guttered, she breathed it back to life. A tray wobbled, she rebalanced it with a fingertip and a look. Twice she felt Zayd's gaze sweep the rim of the room and catch on her. Twice she lowered her eyes and stepped left so that duty would cloak her. Speeches came like measured rain. The imam of the old mosque spoke, voice a bell. A historian told the building's story from coral stone to cracked plaster. Maryam thanked, invited, and, with the lightest touch of humor, shamed the richest into giving more. When the charity chest began to fill envelopes, velvet pouches, promissory notes folded like birds, Layla exhaled in a way she had not realized she was holding. At the edge of the dais, a small scene unfolded beneath notice. A boy of perhaps 10, clothes to clean for poverty and to plain for privilege, drifted near the chest, eyeing it with a complexity Layla recognized, hunger and shame doing battle. She crossed to him as if she had intended it all along and crouched so the world above them blurred. She asked, glancing at his clenched fist. He opened it by degrees to reveal a single pearl, imperfect, its shape more tear than moon. My mother says it is not enough, he whispered, eyes bright with the effort not to cry. Layla took the pearl in her palm. It was warm from him, cool from the hall. All pearls are memory of grit turned faithful. She looked the boy in the eye. She placed the pearl in the chest herself and then, because the world needs witnesses, guided his hand to touch the lid. For the mosque, she said. He nodded, a sharp little jerk, and ran. When she straightened, Maryam was watching from across the hall. The older woman's expression did not change, but she gave the smallest nod, as if to mark a line in a ledger only she kept. Later, when the formalities loosened and music softened into something made for drifting conversations and letting shoulders drop, Layla stepped onto the balcony to breathe the night. The gardens wore their darkness like velvet, the sea beyond the walls exhaled. Somewhere near the Falcon Mews, a bird called once, a long arc of sound that seemed to braid itself to the stars. You disappear too easily, Zayd said, arriving without fanfare. And you find me too easily, she said, tuning her voice to the smallness of the hour. I was looking, he answered, as if anything else would be a lie too small to use. They leaned on the stone rail, not touching, their elbows a hand's width apart. Between that hand's width lay the difference between rumor and story, between breath and vow. Maryam warns me, he said. She is right, Layla said. She studied the lantern light on his hand, strong, steady, a thin scar at the base of his thumb. She asked, not coyly, not boldly, simply as a woman who has learned that the shortest roads are the ones that do not circle. He did not answer immediately. A musician in the far hall found a minor key and held it, and the sound combed the night. I want Noor's laughter to be a thing the house can count by, he said finally. That is to wants, she said, and almost smiled. They are one, he said. Silence hung, then settled on their shoulders like a shawl. Layla did not move. If I stay, she said at last, it must be with a name the walls know. Not a secret moved between rooms. I will name it, he said. Naming is not only speaking, she said. He turned to face her, a beat. 2. Inshallah, she said, which is the only honest agreement in a world where tomorrow has its own mind. A footfall in the hall, the moment folded itself away. They returned to the light, to the weaving of guest and host, to the choreography of power that kept the palace upright. After midnight, the last lanterns were lowered, the last trays stacked, the connon strings wrapped and tucked away. The charity chest was carried to the secure room, to guards walking beside it as if it were a small animal that could be startled. In the nursery, Noor slept with open fingers, the falcon fallen beside her on the pillow, its carved eye catching a bit of starlight. Layla, too wakeful for sleep, walked the corridor that joined the old wing to the new. The stones changed underfoot from rough to smooth, from the size of a palm to the size of a step. Across centuries, people had chosen different ways to meet the ground. At a window slit, she stopped. The sky was a bowl rinsed clean by sand and night. The crescent moon hung like a promise written with a fine brush. She touched the sill and thought of her father's courtyard, of the old mosque waiting for its skin to be mended, of a woe with a pearl too small and exactly right. Behind her, a soft sound. She turned. Sheikh Maryam stood as if grown from shadow, ivory a bioluminous even in low light. "You will not run," Maryam said. "Not as a question." "No," Layla answered. Maryam considered, the way a falcon considers distance. "Good." She came to the window and looked out with Layla. She tipped her chin toward the sky. "I am trying," Layla said. Maryam's mouth made a shape that might one day become a smile. "Try less." She turned to go, paused. Then she left, carrying with her the sound of beads that count what men forget. Near dawn, Zayd sat alone in his study, ink staining the pad of his ring finger, a draft before him that began as all official things begin with titles and seals and then, in the margin, broke into a sentence that was not official at all. "I am learning to build rooms where fear does not fit." He set the pen down, pushed the paper away, stood, and went to the window. The first call to prayer lifted from the city like a net-catching light. The palace breathed in and then out. In the nursery, Noor turned in her sleep and reached toward the empty space she had learned would be full by the time morning came. In the guest chamber, Layla's hand open on the coverlet as if to offer the night sun ease curled and relaxed again. When the sun's edge appeared, slow and sure, it burnished the domes until they looked lit from within. A falcon rose from the mews and cut clean into the morning, a dark arrow against gold. For a suspended instant it hovered wings holding a question in the air, then it turned and, sure as any story worth telling, returned to the glove it trusted. The days after the banquet did not merely pass. They unfurled like long ribbons of silk laid end to end across the palace, each hour catching a different glint of light. In Abu Dhabi, heat pressed itself into stone, and then rose again at dusk like breath from a sleeping lion. Within the palace, everything seemed fractionally slower, as if the building were digesting an event that had been both feast and test. People greeted one another with care, weighing words before they left the mouth. Even water in the courtyard fountain sounded more deliberate, each drop landing as if it had chosen the exact tile it desired. Noor's jaw returned and learned a new shape. It rang brighter and carried the hush of possession, a child's knowledge that laughter is a delicate vessel best held with two hands. She began naming the palace as if claiming it by language. In the gardens, she pointed with solemn authority, Yasmin, Ward. Layla repeated the names, letting the Arabic syllables roll like beads, then added small lessons the child tucked behind her ear: how jasmine opens at night, how the rose defends sweetness with thorns, how Narcissus must be given a bowl shallow enough to keep it modest. Zayd noticed the house as a man notices a field he has sown, not leaf by leaf, but in the whole shift of green. He found himself pausing in doorways, listening to Noor's voice in the rooms she had once crossed like a wary bird. He measured outcomes less by decree and more by temperature. A cooler air, and Layla enter, a stillness that wasn't silence but attention settling. Beyond the gates, the banquet continued as rumor, changed by each tongue that carried it. In the souk, an old jeweler swore he had seen a boy carry a tear-shaped pearl to the palace chest. A spice seller said the pearl was a rumor itself, invented by a poet. A baker's wife insisted she had seen the woman called Layla kneel to the child, then call him son, though no one could say whose son. In Dubai, a cousin of a cousin lifted his eyebrows and asked whether Zayd was tired of waiting for a bride whose lineage matched the ceiling height. The desert carried all of it the way it carries heat, without interest, but thoroughly. On the second afternoon, after the call to door, a servant with careful steps came to the nursery. "Sheikh Maryam requests you," he said to Layla, putting the weight of the request exactly where it belonged. She followed him through an inner corridor lined with calligraphy that seemed to breathe ink curves that had carried prayer longer than living memory. The private sitting room smelled faintly of orange blossom and old paper. Brass lattice threw mobiles of light across the carpet. Maryam sat in a chair carved to look like a throne, remembering it had once been a tree. Prayer beads lay in her lap like a river she could make change direction with one finger. You have a place here, she began. And it was neither welcome nor warning, but both, yet places do not stay by consent alone. I serve Noor, Layla said. When you serve Noor, you serve this house, Maryam said. Affection is a bridge. Layla nodded, holding her breath until it behaved. Maryam's eyes were cool, merciful, not for vanity. The audience ended with a slight tilt of Maryam's head permission to go, and a note entered in a ledger no one saw. Layla stepped into the corridor with the odd sensation of having been both crowned and warned. She stood where the mosaic met the plain stone, 1 foot on each, and told herself to breathe like water, not fire. That night the moon rose red over the dunes, a fruit too full for its branch. On the roof, Zayd watched it climb until the edges thinned back toward silver. He could hear the sea beyond the city drawing its breath and letting it go. Footsteps approached soft leather, no haste. Layla. She took her place a pace away, palms flat to the warm parapet. For a while, they stood without the burden of speech. She asked at last, "Everything means something," he said. The silence afterward threaded them together like a thin gold wire, invisible, unbreakable only if you did not touch it too hard. Letters began as dawn habits. A cousin in Riyadh wrote with the air of concern had the Sheikh engaged a new governess without consulting certain elders. A dignitary in Muscat sent a falcon hood sewn with date-colored leather and a note to warm to be courtesy, to cool to be friendship. Zayd read the note once, then again, then folded it as precisely as anger can be folded and placed it in a drawer where he kept documents he would not let others carry. In the library one long hot afternoon, Layla taught Noor letters using a shallow tray of sand. The child drew a curved line and looked up. "Like the moon," she declared. "Like the moon." Layla agreed. Noor's small hand trembled. Layla corrected it not by pushing but by placing her fingertip into the hollow between Noor's knuckles, an anchor disguised as touch. When Noor ran for more reeds, Zayd moved from the doorway. "Maryam tells me you shall have a title," he said. Layla kept her eyes on the sand, smoothing it flat again with the side of her hand. "I think armor is useful but heavy," he said. "Armor is what lets certain people step into the field at all," Layla answered. He didn't look away. "Then we will call you what you are. Keeper of the nursery is too small. Guardian would be truer." The word settled between them, and through a shadow neither of them feared. A seal arrived that evening from the Ministry of Social Affairs, wax still soft from heat, the ribbon faintly scented with ink. Zayd already knew what the parchment would say: convene, clarify, contain. He went with the care of a man walking into wind. The council chamber had a ceiling high enough to make a man feel smaller in order to enlarge his attention. 3 elders, faces the color of sun-baked clay, watched him the way old hawks watch dunes, for movement that means food or threat. Their questions were blades sheathed in silk. Where is she from? What vetting has been done? Does her presence intersect dangerously with alliances we have promised to keep? He learned long ago that sometimes silence answers better than logic. He offered facts like dates sweet, truthful, few. He named Noor's improvement and the child's peace as public goods. He left unspoken what was not theirs to weigh. The meeting adjourned with the elders exchanging looks that said, "We have not won. We have not lost." The corridor outside felt cooler than it was. At the palace, the moon was pale and high like a coin worn smooth by prayer. He found Layla in the courtyard near the lion fountain, a bide drawn close against the night. She had the posture of someone listening not to sound but to its absence. "They will ask more questions," he said. "Then we will offer better answers," she said. Her voice lowered whatever was raised in him. He set his palm briefly on the rim of the fountain, grounding himself in stone cooled by water. "Maryam wants your name spoken in the halls," he said. She asked. "I will speak it," he said. The day chosen for the naming began as all-important days do in ordinary time. Bread rose in the ovens, laundry snapped white in the courtyard. A groom brushed the silky legs of a bay mare until the animal gleamed with patience. Only the small differences told the truth. Brass polished twice. Guards rotated early. Flowers chosen not only for beauty but for scent at calms. In the inner majlis, Maryam sat at the right hand of the empty seat that would hold Zayd. On the carpet at her feet were arranged the tokens that would make this more than breath: a small silver hand toward the ill wilt, a length of green silk for blessing, a wooden comb with cedars carved into the handle, a basin of water carried from the old mosque's courtyard that morning, cold with the shadow had known. The household gathered, not everyone, but enough to fix the event in memory. The steward stood with the staff arrayed behind him, cooks still smelling faintly of cardamom, gardeners with sole under their nails despite their attempt to scrub it away, grooms, maids, the youngest runner with dust on his cuffs. They took their places the way fields take rain. Zayd entered, and the room adjusted the way a tent adjusts to wind. He did not sit. "This house has learned a new habit," he said. He lifted his gaze to Layla, who stood at the threshold with her hands open, empty, not as lack but as declaration. "I do not grasp. I receive." Maryam rose with the green silk and laid it over Layla's shoulders, not as a veil, but as a mantle. "A name," she murmured, audible in the hush, "is a door." She dipped her fingers into the basin and let 3 drops fall into Layla's palms. She placed the cedar comb in Layla's hand and closed her fingers about it. There are sounds a house makes that do not travel beyond it. The sigh that followed was one. Servant shoulders lowering because respect had been named the lad. A steward's breath leaving him in approval. A child somewhere in the corridor laughing, as if on cue. Noor came barreling into the majlis at that moment, braids flying, and slid to a respectful stop that nearly ended in a tumble. She asked, eyes bright. "It is," Zayd said. "Then I will show her my letters," Noor declared, as if the proof of a title is always an instruction. The days that followed were not easier, but they were clearer. The title traveled faster than Layla could, and where she arrived, doors no longer asked questions with their hinges. In the kitchen, the chief cook bowed his head a fraction lower. In the stables, a groom offered his hand to help her over a puddle as if she were a guest rather than kin by labor. In the library, the keeper of books unlocked a cabinet of children's manuscripts bound in leather softened by a century of small palms. With clarity came challenge. A letter from an elder in Alain spoke of traditions that should not be amended for convenience. A whisper reached the souk that the guardian would soon forget the market that had taught her to count pears, I feel. And then, like a pebble thrown exactly to find the center of a pond, an unsigned message arrived at the palace gate for Zayd. A house that invites a storm should check its roof twice. He read it once and placed it aside. He did not show it to Maryam. He did not show it to Layla. He walked to the mews instead, where falcons waited on perches like letters unsent. A handler placed a bird on his glove. It shifted weight, claws adjusting pressure, respect. "She's young," the handler said, strong. Zayd looked up into a sky so blue it seemed to be its own law. "Let her go," he said. And when the jest released, the falcon exploded into height as if the word had unlatched a door in the air. She arrowed outward, drew a wide imperfect circle, fought wine that came in a wicked cross, stuttered for a heartbeat, found angle, corrected. She did not fall. She turned. She came back. That evening, the palace accepted visitors from the ministry for a tour of the nursery. Nothing formal, merely the sort of visit that says everything without saying it. Layla arranged the room in a way that revealed nothing except order. Shelves with books whose spines had learned the habits of small hands. Baskets with toes that looked used because they were, not because someone had staged them. A prayer mat by the window with a small pillow Noor had embroidered with 4 crooked stars and one very straight crescent. The minister, a woman whose gaze had the keen kindness of a teacher who expects much, asked Noor to read. Noor did, faltering only once on a letter that looks like another letter when drawn with too much confidence. Layla let the girl falter and then placed a fingertip on the exact curve where correction becomes comprehension. Noor corrected herself and smiled not at the minister, but at the letter, as if they had agreed to be friends. The minister's mouth softened into approval. "Guardian," she said to Layla when they left, not testing the title but acknowledging it. Between public moments, life threaded itself through small acts. She read verses from old poets and asked Noor what color they were. "This one is green," Noor said once, and Layla said, "Yes." At Maryam's suggestion, Layla began attending the women's majlis twice a week, not as servant, not as equal, but as a presence that reminded the room that the palace had lengthened its table. Some women received her with curiosity, a few with coolness. She answered questions and did not answer others. When a matron asked too sweetly where Layla's mother was buried, Layla said, "In a city that remembers her hands," and offered a plate of dates that made the question look small. On a rare free morning, Layla took Noor and to guards to the old city under the excuse of buying children's paper. The souk breathed spices, copper, and sun. A calligrapher sharpened reeds with a small knife and watched Noor with eyes that had seen letters learned to walk for 60 years. "Write Allah," he invited gently, sliding the tray closer. Noor looked to Layla, who nodded. The reed trembled. The first stroke was too thin. the second made with courage and consequence. The calligrapher's smile was a lantern. Again, he said. By the time they returned, a shadow had outrun them. A rumor arrived on swift feet, a photo taken by someone who mistook privacy for Curacao Layla in the souk, Noor at her side, a guard in the frame like an exclamation point. It reached the palace as a question: should a guardian walk the market? Maryam read the rumor as a physician reads a pulse calmly. Let them see her feet on stone, she said. That night, Zayd found Layla in the library with a stack of children's books bound in soft leather. You took her to the market, he said. She did not flinch. I did. She learned the price of paper and the weight of reeds. He nodded. There is always talk, she said. He put his hand on the back of the chair and left it there long enough for the chair to learn his warmth. Guardian of Noor, he said, almost to test how the room carried the name. The shelves did not answer. The name did. Pressure mounted not as a wave but as a tide a little more each day, until ankles noticed and then knees. An elder from a coastal tribe arrived with fish and left with warnings about storms that begin inland. A Polish cousin proposed a list of eligible brides whose pedigrees were bluer than tile. Zayd did not choose. He learned to let certain days pass like weather you cannot outrun. The unsigned messages stop after the third when the steward set a new rule at the gate. Every letter without a name goes to fire. The courtyard felt cleaner for it. One late afternoon, the falconer sent for Layla and Noor. She should see how returning looks, he said, meaning the child. But his eyes flicked to Layla, on the mews wall. The boy who had once tucked a rose behind his ear stood with leather gloves too big for his wrists, grinning with a pride that made them fit. The handler placed the young falcon on Layla's arm only long enough for Noor to see the tremor in the bird's impulse to fly and the steadiness in the human arm that allowed it. Trust, the handler said, not as lesson but as translation. When the jest slipped free, the falcon punched the sky. Noor clapped once, then pressed her hands together, as if prayer had surprised her before she could decide to make it. As Magritte painted the palace in amber and deep blue, Zayd drafted a brief notice to be posted in the household and quietly circulated among those who mattered beyond it. It said nothing and everything. Layla, guardian of Noor, is empowered to act in matters of the child's well-being inside and outside the palace, by order of Sheikh Zayd bin. Just enough ink to hold the door open, just enough formal breath to make those who wish to close it think twice. He took the notice to Maryam. She read it twice, lips moving without sound. Short is strong, she said, tapping the paper. Length invites debate. She sealed it with wax the color of pomegranate and pressed into it a signet that had outlived 3 rulers and 2 rebellions. That night, when the house had settled into the soft talk of sleeping rooms, Zayd walked the half-lit corridor toward the nursery. He paused at the threshold as he always did. Noor slept on her side, palm open, the carved falcon between her hand and cheek as if flight were a pillow. On the floor near the window, Layla sat with her back to the wall, knees drawn up, a book open but forgotten. The lamplight made a small, obedient sun on the page. For a long moment he did nothing except stand and understand that certain rooms teach a man what kind of king he wants to be. The kind whose power enlarges the gentle. He stepped inside. Layla looked up. No words. He gestured toward the chair by the fountain. She shook her head, stayed on the floor as if to say, tonight I want to stay near the tiles that have learned to cool under heat. He took the chair anyway, not because he needed it, but because the room required one of them to be slightly above and one slightly below so that balance would be seen as well as felt. Water spoke its single language. The night lengthened until it was not night but a narrow bridge between days. Before dawn, the first call to prayer lifted out of the city like a silver net catching dark. In the small hush that followed, Layla spoke, voice low enough not to wake the child. Zayd breathed, a quiet assent. Then keep refusing, he said. The sun rose clean. Minarets lit. The palace took a breath and chose habits again. Somewhere beyond the walls, a rumor turned to dust and fell from a moth. Somewhere inside them, a title found its weight, a child found her letters curve, and a falcon drew a tighter circle than the day before. By noon, the household notice had traveled to every hinge and handle, and by night, in the small country of the nursery, a woman hummed a melody that neither began nor ended, and a little girl's breath braided itself to that tune until sleep, like mercy, covered them both.